Hello Year 5, it's Mrs Gill here and we are continuing to read our book Cosmic. It's One Giant Leap for All Boy Kind by Frank Cottrell Boyce. So we have now reached chapter 27, Some Kind of Lovely. At launch -6, I was still insanely hoping that Dad would actually turn up, especially at launch -6 to be honest, because at launch -5 they were going to do the spray-on Power Rangers spacesuit thing. The thing about the spray-on spacesuits is that you have to have a bold chest before they put the stuff on you. So, if you're a dad, you have to have your chest waxed. That means they pour warm wax all over you and then rip it off with strips of cloth. When the wax comes off, it pulls your chest hairs out with it. At launch -5, my dad still hadn't come, and I was screaming in pain and looking at a piece of wax covered in curly hairs that had been pulled out by Root. "There," said Dr. Drax, "the agony of re-entry will be nothing after that. Apparently, women do their own legs, and they don't even get to go to space afterwards." After that, they sprayed on my spacesuit. It felt warm and tickly, and I was allowed to go back into the living quarters and wait for it to dry. When I got there, Mr. Bean was waiting for me. He shook my hand and wished me well. "You take care of yourself now," he said. And I said, "I thought you were going to be taking care of us. I thought we had to do was enjoy the view." He laughed. Then he said, "Since you mentioned the view, there was something I wanted to tell you. You got your pips right?" "Yes." "Think hard about what you put in there. It could be your most important piece of safety equipment." "What? More important than our spacesuits?" "Maybe. You see, the thing is about space is..." I said, "It's full of dead people. You already told me. Space is somewhere else. Do you see? It's not just far away. It's a different kind of place. It can get a hold of you." "Are you saying you'll like it when you get there?" He smiled. "My mother used to say that. Did yours?" You looked out the window even though it was daylight, and you could still see the moon, pale but huge, like a big ball. He said, "Did you ever hear of Ed White? First American to spacewalk. A long time ago now, 1965. First American to open a door into space, to dangle from a wire and look down at the Earth and see the whole planet roll beneath him." He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everything he knew and didn't know. His friends, enemies, places he'd been, places he'd never go, all just sitting there in his field of vision. When it was time to go back inside, he couldn't tear himself away. He was like, "Let me stay a little while, why don't you? And isn't that America? Oh no, it's Africa, and you know..." The command pilot, Jim McDivitt, had to bawl him out somewhat to bring him back to his senses. "Do you see what I'm saying?" I said, "Not really." Florida had just arrived in her Power Rangers get-up. She said we were supposed to keep moving around to check for fissures and flaws. Mr. Bean went on, "I'm talking about how to stay in one piece. Try to get hold of things that are important, the good and true things about your life. Up there is some kind of lovely, and maybe you need to have something in your heart, you know, something even more lovely to help you find your way home. Otherwise, maybe you could be beguiled." "Beguiled?" "I think that would be the word. I'll say good night." "Good night, Mr. Bean." He smiled and said, "Call me Alan." Just as he was about to go out the door, Florida shouted, "Wait, Alan Bean! Apollo 12, 1969! That is cosmic!" It was the first time she'd ever used my word. There probably isn't any other word for being able to touch someone who has walked on another world. "Wow," said Florida, "an Apollo astronaut. That makes you dead famous, doesn't it? I mean, you had a ticker tape parades and went on all these parties, and you were on telly all over the world." "I wasn't on telly so much, actually. I broke the television camera. When we landed on the moon, I accidentally pointed the camera at the sun and burned it out. Imagine that. We went all the way to the moon and didn't get any holiday footage. So, not on telly as much as some. What I remember is being on the moon. I remember every second, every stone, every star we saw. Sometimes it feels like I never really came back." He shrugged. "But I did come back," he said. "And you remember that? We're going, it seems far away and dangerous, but you will look back," which is more or less exactly what my dad said to me on my first day at Waterloo High. As soon as Alan had gone, I wedged my old phone into the PIP, because it had pictures of home on it, and Dad's St. Christopher statue. It wouldn't have fitted if it hadn't been a bit broken. Florida said, "What are you taking that for?" And I said, "Why? What are you taking?" She said, "Haribo mostly." And now we move on to chapter 8. I want my daddy. When we left the crew quarters the next day, the dads were all waiting at the transporter, ready to say their last goodbyes. Monsieur Martinet, Samson One, and Eddie Ascanandu, with the 2 security guards, one on each side of him. They chatted to their boys, rubbed their hair, and punched them in the shoulder. Samson One shouted to me to look after my boy now. I had one last crazy hopeful thought, that my dad might show up and the others, but he didn't. At last I had Alan to talk to. Dr. Drax gave us each a lighter-than-air ice lolly, shaped like the dandelion. "A last-minute treat," she smiled. "When Infinity Park opens, we're going to sell these all over the world. Aren't they just delicious? Oh, by the way, I have to ask you all to hand in your new Drax phones, just to protect the security of the mission." The first thing I did when I got on the flight deck was to shuffle Dad's St. Christopher out of my PIP and wedge it into the instrument panel. The whole rocket was throbbing, so St. Christopher looked as though he was doing some kind of mad dance. The other thing that I found in there was the little credit card stress tester. As I picked it up, it changed from blue to pink, and a message appeared. Just one word: stressed. The infinite possibility was 200 feet high. At the top you could feel it swaying in the wind, and you could hear the wind rolling in and out of the pipes and engines, sobbing and sighing and generally sounding miserable. As a responsible adult, I had to do all the last-minute checks. All the way through, Samson too kept spouting space facts. I suppose it was his way of coping. "Do you know," he said, "that exposure to weightlessness makes you grow because there's less pressure on your spinal column. It relaxes and makes you taller." Just what I need, I thought. "A few more inches," I said. "We could have a see how you grow chart, just to see if it's true. A kind of experiment." I made them all line up so I could mark their heights on the back of the safety door, just to take their minds off things. Max suddenly said, "I'm not frightened. When the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Also, only the strong survive, and I am strong." "Yes, but I'm not strong," said Hassan. "Does that mean I won't survive? Where's my daddy? I want my daddy." Florida said, "Your daddy's probably in jail by now," which didn't help. The stress tester had changed from pink to scarlet. The message read, "See doctor immediately." I said, "We're all worried about taking off. Let's stop thinking about it. Let's think about inflating our escape suits. In fact, let's do it." I hadn't just been the electric Ribena. I was right. It was distractingly funny. The kids all sat there in their places. I made sure they were strapped in, made sure the suits were all on properly, made sure they all remembered where the inflation buttons were, then got on into my own place and shouted, 3, 2, 1. The suits began to hiss and grow, and we all swelled up like giggling tangerines again. The suits expanded into every corner of the module, with just our heads sticking out. Then the countdown started. 20, 19, 18. "I need a wee," said Hassan. "Then do one. You've got your special suit on, don't forget." "Alan Shepard wet himself just before Freedom 7 took off," said Florida. No one else heard her say this, because there was a sound like mountains snoring. Everything shook like the worst earthquake film you've ever seen. Our stomachs dropped to the floor. The rest of ourselves dropped to the floor, and suddenly it felt like there was a giant invisible dad. But he was furious, and he was crushing us between the palms of his hands, and we could do nothing because our arms wouldn't move. We couldn't shout because our faces wouldn't work. And I remember thinking, If this is what it takes to get us up there, what is it going to take to get us back down again? And we'd also like to thank Macmillan again for allowing us to enjoy and read this story with you. Thank you.